Okay, Elon Musk recently announced that he will be leaving his role as a top advisor for President Trump after spearheading the Department of Government Efficiency. Musk's decision to leave was announced a day after an interview with CBS, in which he described his disappointment over President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Several lawmakers have shared their skepticism over the bill as well. So, what do local Republicans think about what's going on in Washington? Kyle Scott is the vice chair of the Harris County GOP and a member of the Harris Central Appraisal District representing Place 2, and he's here with us now. If you have any questions or comments for Kyle, give us a call, 713-440-8870. Kyle, welcome to the program.
Hi, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Kyle, so what would you say right now is the GOP sentiment over the big, beautiful bill?
I think all of us are happy about the extension of the tax cuts, the extension of SALT, the tax breaks that will be given on people earning tips, Social Security benefits, as well as auto interest. And then there's also with the, tying some of the benefits for Medicaid to work requirements, I think a lot of people are satisfied with as well.
Do you think, Kyle, that you can take the taxes off of Social Security, but you could turn around in the next year and cut Social Security so that, in effect, a person getting $1,000 a month doesn't pay taxes on it, but now it's only going to get $750 a month?
You're right. It's always possible to cut entitlement programs. As we know, that Social Security is the proverbial third rail of politics.
Right.
Very few people want to touch it because of their political fate if they do, right? As anybody will tell you when you're talking about the deficit that, until we address some of the larger entitlement programs or the military, any huge effort to curb our spending is going to be curtailed to some of the smaller matters, right? I don't think that there's been any serious proposal been put forward to, really cut back on the Social Security benefits.
Yeah.
The Tax Foundation says the bill's tax and spending changes would increase the 10-year budget deficit by $2.6 trillion from 2025 through 2034 on a conventional basis before added interest cost. So explain to me how this is supposed to be helping the deficit, yet it could take us into a $2.6 trillion deficit.
Yeah, like many people, right? I'm what you consider a deficit hawk, in the sense that I think one of the existential threats facing us are deficits, right? What this bill does is so when you look out 10 years into the future, when we talk about either reducing or adding to the deficit, what this bill does is it actually curbs the arc of what the deficit is. So prior to this bill, it would have been something like $6 trillion in projected deficit over the next 10 years, and this reduces the arc of the deficit growth.
So while we're on the subject of finances, the Department of Government Efficiency, all these cuts, all these people losing their jobs, cuts of USA Department, on and on and on and on. Have we seen any real financial benefit that we can point to?
So this, again, is a point of discrepancy, and, different people are kind of giving you different answers, and it's not kind of tough. It's extremely difficult to track where all of these are because a lot of the proposed changes coming out of DOGE require congressional approval. So you can claim victory on one side, but until Congress approves those cuts, they don't necessarily go into effect. And of course, all of this stuff is currently being litigated as well. So until it works its way through the court system, we're not going to have an accurate accounting of all the cuts that were made.
Now, I do have one more question for you on this topic. Generally, Republicans are known for being very fiscally conservative. If you're looking at this, that is not necessarily what the president is proposing. How do you explain that?
So I'll say, two things on this matter. I don't know that you would run into anybody on the Republican side who would say, yeah, we should spend more, right? Those are very few and far between. But I also don't think that you run into any voters. A lot of times voters, it's one of these issues where voters say, yes, we want cuts, just don't cut the things I like. And that's a predicament. That's a predicament that all elected officials find themselves in, because on a grand scale, on a macro level, we all know that a deficit is a problem. But on the flip side, all of us have programs the government provides that we like, and we're not willing to cut those. So in order for somebody in a national office, whose constituency is the entire nation, they're going to have to make cuts that are going to hurt somebody at some point in time, or at least earn them a little bit of ire in those eyes. So that's the political reality of the landscape, is that until voters actually make this a priority or are willing to sustain cuts to programs even they like, it's going to be very difficult to make serious changes within our
I guess
deficit.
My question then would be, you keep using the term, cuts that people like. I mean, when we are looking at Medicaid, the majority of people on Medicaid are in need of it, and majority are children. And I'm not sure it's a like thing versus a livelihood.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. Like isn't necessarily the most accurate term. Things that we deem essential or those sorts of things, right? So things that we want government to do. On the question of Medicare within the big, beautiful bill, right? It's that work requirement that the Republicans added in. So it doesn't cut benefits for children or for people who, will need it. What it requires is that if you are able to work, and you choose not to work, then those benefits will be taken away. But if you choose to work and you still can't afford the insurance, you can still maintain your Medicaid benefits. So that's sort of...
Yeah, quickly, I just want to remind folks we're talking with Kyle Scott, who is the vice chair of the Harris County GOP, and we're taking your calls and questions. It's 713-440-8870. There's a couple places I want to go with what you've already said, but back to the Medicare, Medicaid, the cutting of those funds. If I understand it correctly, and we've spoken with other elected officials about this, the amount that is asked to be cut from this budget line, if you cut everything else in that budget line and left Medicare or Medicaid alone, you still wouldn't be able to meet the level they're asking to be cut at. So they are actually saying you have to cut these programs, whether we like it or not, or they say it in words, they're saying it in numbers. So I'm just curious your reaction to that before I ask the other question I had for you.
I think what we're talking about here is how we're defining the people who receive these programs and what we consider cuts. So if I were to receive Medicaid and this bill tells me that I can no longer receive it, the question is, well, why am I no longer receiving it? And is it a cut that people would agree with or not agree with?
Are there enough of those individuals to make up for the amount of money, the 800 million they're saying has to be cut or whatever it is? Does the math
I
work?
don't think, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I stepped on you there.
That's okay.
So I don't think that it would, is what I've seen, the scoring that's come out, the projections are there, but it always comes down to the enforcement mechanism, right? How is this going to be administered? And then are those necessary? So the people who would no longer qualify under this bill, how are we going to identify them and how will they be removed from those benefit programs? So it's really going to come down to the implementation side and not just the legislative side.
Okay, back to the question that I actually had for you a few minutes ago is Trump projects himself as the great negotiator. And we have seen the idea is he throws a big thing out there and then he battles with people to get it to what it is. And so there's give and take and negotiation. And we see this with the tariffs, the way he's handling those. Are our elected officials on both sides of the aisle not doing what they should in the battling back? That just because he puts out a program, we've seen this in all aspects of his career, there is a fight that happens after it. It seems as though most Republicans, when he puts out a program, are like, all right, that's what the president wants. Shouldn't they be fighting back? Isn't that his way of operating?
So in terms of fighting back, just so I'm clear on the question, fighting back against what he's suggesting or fighting back against the style in which he's doing it?
Well, I assume the style in which he's doing it, that ship has left. But in what he's proposing isn't there inherent in him a negotiation that he expects to go on? And it seems as though his policies are put out there and the Republicans are like, hey, the president said it, we're there for him.
Well, if you think that there needs to be pushback. I think that, the left side of the aisle is providing some of that pushback. Now, when we think about the role of the president, right, they have the commander-in-chief hat. They have a lot of different hats they wear. And one of the informal hats is that they are kind of, the leader of the party for the term in which they were in office. So the question becomes how much of the disagreement with the government, with the president's proposals, should happen in public, and how much of that should happen behind closed doors, right? Keep family business private. And then when we all go out front, we stick together as a family. So the question isn't, for me, are those negotiations going on, but should they be happening in private or should they be happening in public?
Well, then answer the other question. Are those negotiations going on, do you believe?
It is, from my understanding, and this is just anecdotal, informal, talking with some of our local Congress people, Trump reaches out to them. And he's open to their communication back to the office as well, saying, I have a problem with this. We need to work on that. And he really is, as much as he is sort of this big idea guy, does leave a lot of that delegation to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
So will the Senate look to make key modifications? And if the GOP is having these negotiations with the president, what type of things do you think they are saying and asking him to do? And what type of modifications do you think need to be done that will lessen the blow to people within the Harris County area?
Yeah. So if I'm asked to predict what's going to happen in politics nowadays, I'm going to be wrong. I have no idea
We all
what's
are,
going to come
Kyle.
out of the
We
Senate,
all are.
where any of that goes. So I'm a terrible prognosticator on that front, right? I think what we traditionally see in the Senate is a larger attachment and endorsement of national issues, right? And this is the way that the system was designed. The House is supposed to represent their local constituency, and the Senate, particularly after the ratification of the 17th Amendment, it takes a more national-oriented approach. So the question is going to be, when the Senate gets in there, when you're looking at questions like Medicaid or the military, are they going to be satisfied with the level of spending that's involved there, and are they going to ask for more, right? So in those terms, I think that you will see, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some spending bumps come out of the Senate, if I was going to put it there. And then if they have to go to reconciliation, that's how they do it. But because this is going through the reconciliation process, there are very strict parliamentary rules on what can happen in either the House or the Senate. So this isn't a traditional bill that goes through each houses and it gets worked out through conference and it goes to the president for signature. Because this is reconciliation, there are tighter restrictions on what can actually be included and what it can address. So in terms of what we're seeing in Harris County, I think all of us in Harris County, now I missed it, but you guys had a weather alert, and our favorite weatherman is right there, center of my screen right now. We know what season we're in. We know what Houston faces in terms of weather. I think everybody within Harris County and our greater Gulf Coast region would like to see more federal spending in terms of drainage and infrastructure issues related to hurricanes.
True.
We had a text that came in, and the text is, if someone needs to make sacrifices, why is it always the poor? How about the billionaire sacrifice a few tax cuts instead?
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I challenge the premise because I don't always think that it's always the same group of people. Do I think that there is some level in which the economics make sense to have different levels of tax cuts, right? Regressive versus progressive. But we also need to understand that this bill was not designed, and I don't see it in there where it's taking things out on the poor. In fact, we've increased the child tax credit from $2,000 to $2,500. We're talking about low-wage earners, tips earners are now getting a tax break. When we're talking about people on fixed income, they are getting a tax break. When we're talking about people who can't afford to buy a car in cash but have to take out an auto loan, they're going to get a tax benefit from those things as well. So when we talk about punishing people or making people pay, it's just not what's in the bill.
Well, there is. I've already read articles about the tips and not being taxed. That people will start tipping less, and they're going to say, "Well, you're not You're not. I saw your reaction there, but I can see that happening where you're a 20% tipper, and they're like, "Well, you're not going to be paying any taxes on it. I'm going to go down to being a 15% tipper." So again, you take from one hand that you gave with the other, right?
I think that level of I think that's grasping at straws. I mean, to predict what
it's being talked
an
about.
obscure taxing policy, right? Because when I tip, at no point do I consider if I tip cash, should I tip less than if I tip on a credit card because they may just be pocketing the cash and therefore net it would I'm giving them the same level of tip. I've never made that calculation
But
before
if you
in my
talk
life.
about paying your fair share of it, the president was very vocal about, he paid very low taxes because he followed the programs that were out there and it worked for him. He wasn't breaking the law. He was doing what the law allowed. If, in fact, that is the case, should not the laws be looked at that those that are making these massive amounts of money in our culture, in our community, in our country, shouldn't we be looking at how to make sure that they're not getting this freedom of being able to get out of taxes when folks at the very low end of it all, they don't have those loopholes to get out of? And so percentage-wise, what they're giving back to the government is so much more than those who have been so fortunate in our economy to be doing better.
Yeah, so a number of issues there. I don't disagree with the premise that the tax code is immensely complex and too complex. And what happens when you build in complexity to the tax code is you create an entire industry of people trying to get around the tax code, right? CPAs aren't going to like me saying this, but I've said it, so sorry. Right? Because those are the truth. And you have to navigate the tax code through GPS, and lower income people are still navigating by the stars, right? To use that metaphor, because we don't have the money that enables us to go out and hire big law firms or big tax firms. So I totally agree that the complexity of the tax code is a disadvantage to average everyday working families. But at the same time, I like the child tax credit, right? Because I'm a beneficiary of that. I like the home mortgage credit. So again, we're back to this paradox of, well, I like this part of the complexity, but I think that there's complexity, but can we save the one that I know and benefits me? So that's a problem there. But when we have to look at where the overall revenue comes from, or the percentage of government revenue from people paying taxes, a married couple making a combined salary of $80,000 a year with 2 kids, they're getting a tax rebate. They're not sending tax money to the government, right? So the question of, are they paying taxes? Well, there's a tax rate attached to their pay stub, but then they're getting a rebate as well once those taxes are filed.
Kyle, there have been some concerns that the president has been exceeding his power. Do you feel that locally, how do Republicans feel about that, given the economy, immigration, some of the situations that we've had, the due process? Locally, what can you say how Republicans feel that the president is doing so far?
So I don't think Republicans or Democrats or independents are going to be much different in our reaction. When our guy is doing it, you like it. When the other guy isn't doing it, we don't like it. I mean, those are just facts of the matter. So if the ends align with our desired ends, then, certain parties are willing to grant more latitude. But I do think that the core group of Republicans, the Republicans that I talk to, we're thinking, yes, we like directionally where these things are going. We also like the idea that because executive orders are used, that we would like to see those executive orders to be turned into legislation, because that's a more sustainable model.
Correct.
Because from one presidency to the next, an executive order just goes away.
Correct.
We saw this with Trump.
So does that
right?
concern you? I want to pause you right there. Does that concern you that we are seeing the president push things through as a Republican? Do you find it a little alarming that perhaps the next president could be a Democrat and he could use those same powers to push things through? Does that concern you at all?
I don't think that we've seen anything differently from the 90s till now. The number of executive orders that are passed through from administration to administration has increased. But we have seen, believe Barack Obama, because of his 8-year term, we saw more executive orders come out of that administration than any other administration.
The president has already,
that was the only way he could get anything done.
I was just going to say the president has already exceeded, I believe, Barack Obama's executive orders.
Do you think, though, that there should
into
be
this section.
guardrails
Yeah.
on use of...
I'm sorry.
Do you believe there should be guardrails on use of these executive orders so that the things that happen can be stable and consistent for our country moving forward, as opposed to each administration turning the boat different directions all the time?
Yeah. So personally,
Yeah,
I won't
personally.
speak for anyone else.
Sure.
I think the law should go through Congress. Now, there are certain emergency situations in which the executive orders need to be issued, right? But for the purpose of stability, it needs to go through the legislative process. But I want to be clear on this. To lay executive orders and say, it's just Trump, it's the Republicans are so bad at this, that's not true. Both sides do it.
So you're pretty happy right now. We have to wrap, but sounds to me like you're pretty happy.
Sorry.
I think we're still super early. I like directionally in the way it's going. I think that, what I'm happy with is most of us feel frustration that the government doesn't do enough, that it doesn't move quickly enough. And Trump is moving quickly and doing a lot of things in his early days. And that's satisfying to see that there's a sort of a freshness to that approach.
But driving a car fast recklessly doesn't get you where you need to go any quicker.
I'll disagree with the term reckless.
Reckless. There you go. Kyle Scott is the vice chair of the Harris County GOP and a member of the Harris Central Appraisal District representing Place 2. Thanks so much for joining us, Kyle. We are always welcome on Hello
Thank you guys
Houston.
very much. Thanks.